sent him an email again. Okay, so we've started recording. So let's just start with the conversation. Yes. So good day everyone. My name is Abduljalal Musa Aliyu, and I'll be having a conversation with Ameen on the topic poetry in a time of crisis. And thank you very much everyone for joining us. So Ameen, I'll just dive directly into the questions. The first question I have here is, you see, crisis often feels endless: political violence, displacement, climate change. I really would love to know what gives you hope about the role of poetry in such a future.
Okay, I did not hear the first part of the question because, like,
I
you
said,
went out a
okay,
little bit. Yeah.
okay. So I said crisis often feels endless. So we have political violence, displacement, climate change. So I ask, what gives you hope about the role of poetry in such a future?
Thank you. And first of all, I'm super excited to be here. And so, in answering that question, I'm going to like talk about my class that I taught this week. So the semester just started, and one of the things I do when at the start of the semester is to talk to my student about what poetry can or cannot do. And we were looking at poetry is not a luxury by Audre Lorde. Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, we're looking at poetry is not a luxury by Audre Lorde, and we obviously expect poetry to do grand things in the world, but I think it would be almost naive and delusional to expect poetry to solve all of these crises that's happening in the world, to solve all of these big things. I think what I appreciate about poetry and what I think poetry offers us is the chance to live through this crisis, live through all of these displacements, and document our experiences of them, which in a way is dealing with those crises by itself. I think the role of poetry is very significant, especially in times of crisis, in living through, dealing with, and understanding our place in the midst of crisis. But I also think it's a thing about understanding scale, understanding what poetry can or cannot do, and using poetry offer us when it comes to dealing with or living through crisis.
All right, thank you. I think the network was a bit. So you see, in moments of crisis, language can feel fragile and insufficient. It's obvious that we have a lot of poets in a lot of places in Palestine, in Sudan, in other places that are not able to do what they are supposed to do, to write poetry, because they are going through crisis. So I would really love to know, how do you approach writing when words themselves actually fail, or at least when they seem to fail?
Hello?
Yeah. Okay, you
I did not
didn't.
hear the middle of the question because it went out again.
Okay, I said, in moments of crisis, language can feel fragile or insufficient. So how do you approach writing when words themselves seem to fail? How do you do it?
I think what compels most people to write before anything else is the need to talk about something. And obviously, when we think about all of the big things that's happening in the world, sometimes it can feel like language is insignificant when we want to make change in the world. But because the driving force for most people at first is just like the need to document, the need to express themselves in ways they wouldn't necessarily be able to express themselves with, let's say, words, like spoken words, for example. um Writing comes in, documentation comes in, archiving comes in. And I think it is particularly harder to excuse me, it is particularly harder to approach language, especially in times like this. But I think it is worth doing something, knowing that in one way or the other, outside of ourselves, the need to document, the need to live through crisis is also like a communal effort, where most people write as a way to kind of like document their own lived experiences and also speak through the lived experience of other people. I'm thinking in the context of like the recent books that are published amongst within our own community. I'm thinking of Ancestor Snapshots by Zainab Bobby. I'm thinking about by Abu Bakr Sadiq. And all of these books are talking about happening. Obviously, language must have been insufficient for her to live through that experience. But they need to document, they need to share the lived experiences with the communal lived experiences of everyone that are living through the same thing. Must have overpowered the lack of or the feel that language must have been insignificant or insufficient. So I think when I think about the failure of language when thinking about crisis or in times of crisis, I think about how much power words, language, poetry can also do, and I think I let the instinct to do more outside of myself, to do more outside of just my own lived experiences, overpower whatever failure I think language must have done or language could do. So I think it's basically just like thinking about in a matter of skill and thinking about what works, what can I get out of this, what will be more productive when I write these things, and then I step outside of that to like document what I've lived through. And I think most poets do that also. Just like going back to the kind of examples I gave with the recent books being published by Zainab Babi, Abubakar Sadiq, other poets that are documenting their lived experiences through crisis. So it's a need to like do more outside of yourself and letting the need to share your experiences with others that have experienced stuff like that also to overpower whatever failure of language that must be happening at that moment.
Oh, all right, all right. That was beautiful. I love that perspective. But I really at this point I really love to ask this question. So, what do you see as the biggest challenge of writing about crisis without reducing poetry to reportage or slogans? Because we have people that keep saying, okay, these poems that you guys are writing, are you guys doing a report? Are you guys now journalists? So stuff like that. People say things like that. So I really love to know.
I think the human populace wouldn't be where it is today without archiving, without documentation. We have lost so much to history, and I think one of the things that makes us a community is the fact that we have all of these shared lived experiences, things that we know we share together as a community, and that is where I think documentation, especially in regards to poetry, is very important. When I would be lying if I say I am not aware of the discourse about okay, don't you think it is performative to write about this when it is happening, especially given that there are better ways to cover those things. But I think that I outside of poetry, I'm thinking about all of the rich history we've had access to, given the fact that okay, these people are being intentional about documenting. Obviously, stories told by our great grandmothers, told to our grandmothers, told to our mothers, told to us. Stories that make us who we are, stories that shape our lived experiences. And I think that if we choose to not document these things, if we choose to not write about these things as they're happening, then so much will be lost to history. I am thinking in the context of all I think there's this popular quote that I'm misremembering right now, but they say those who document are in control of history or in control of whatever. And obviously this has to do with like colonialism or something like that. And the fact that the colonizers, the Western masters were mostly in charge of documenting what happened. So our experience, our reaction to these things were mostly filtered through what was documented by them because we did not or we were not entirely intentional about documenting our own experiences. So I feel like nobody should bring up the argument that, okay, why are you writing about these things when you're not a journalist or anything? Because I feel like each person is going to tell it a story differently, and the kind of ways we can tell stories with poetry, the kind of ways we can document with poetry is very different from the way we are going to document, we say, journalism with formal language. So I think it's just a thing where people don't understand how much change, how much power we can access through poetry. That is why they make the argument for, oh, should you be documenting these things as not a journalist, as all of this. But I believe that if we write about things when they're happening, if we write about things the way they are, we are securing history, um, we are shaping the narrative the way they are meant to be shaped, and we are not letting them be filtered through anybody. We are not letting other people tell our stories where we can't tell them. So I absolutely believe that we should write about anything we feel the need to write about. Because if we don't write about them the way we want to write about them, then other people are going to like write about them in ways that are going to not fit our lived experiences.
Okay. Thank you very much. I mean,
Yeah.
now, you see, as a Nigerian, and now you work in the US, right?
Yeah.
So how does navigating between geographies shape the way you write about crisis? And I am asking this because I really want to know, do you feel pressured to write about crisis? Do you feel like, okay, I am in the US now, but if I decide to write about other things, it might feel like I am running away from my country, I'm running away from myself. Do you feel anything like that?
First of all, I think proximity is important when we choose to tell stories. I feel like there are certain people that can tell certain stories and certain people that don't have the right to tell certain stories. I don't think I've ever been the kind of poet to write about crises that are happening outside of myself. I don't think I've ever written any poem in response to like communal violence or violence that is happening outside of my own life. So in regards to that, I don't think I've ever felt the pressure to write about writing a response to crisis that's happening in the world, because I just don't think that's the kind of poet that I am. And also, like when we are thinking about crisis, we crisis can be both internal and external.
Yes.
I do not write about external crisis because I don't think it is. Obviously, I'm aware of these things. Obviously, they concern me. Obviously, they shape the way I live and move through the world. But in my exploration, especially my exploration with poetry, I think I am more invested in crisis of the self, of the internal crisis rather than the external crisis. So I mostly write to understand, document, and explore things that are happening within my life and not necessarily stepping outside of myself to write about communal violence, write about war and all of that. But do I think poets that write about this, do I think they are writing about it just because of because it's the hot topic? No. I feel like as I mentioned before, if we all choose to not do the work of documenting, or if we all choose the word of the work choose to not do the work of documentation, then we are going to lose a lot to history. I think it is absolutely important, and I don't think that we should try to gatekeep who should write about something if they have close proximity to that thing. It's like saying someone that is from the north, for example, that is living in the United States should not write about all of the things that's happening in the north, just given the fact that they live in the United States. Because someone migrated or something doesn't remove them from their lived experience. We all have ties back home and all of that. So I think proximity is important while telling stories like this. And I think there are certain people that should tell certain stories. But I don't think myself as a poet, I don't think I'm interested in telling stories about external crisis or like communal crisis that's happening outside of myself.
Um, Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now, exact question. Um, People say, of course, there are a lot of people that believe,
Yeah.
right? Now, if as a poet, since we are talking about crisis, if as a poet that is a Nigerian, if you refuse, if you do not write about crisis, do you also think you not writing about crisis is also a response to the crisis that is happening in the country you are from? Like, you are a Nigerian and you live in the US. feel that is also response to those external crises?
Um, that's a good question, and I think no response is usually a response. I have realized this in my personal life, and I think it can be viewed through two lenses. I don't think that I mean, I feel like authorial intention is important, and if someone is choosing to write or to not write about something, they might have their own reasons for choosing or not choosing to do that. So I think it's just a thing whereby there's a popular thing where I think it goes the lack of or the absence of evidence is not the um absence or the evidence of absence or something like that. I can't remember how that goes. But I think it's a thing where you can view it through two lenses. I think not writing or not talking about something is a response in a way. It's a way of talking about it. But I if I'm thinking about it in the context of myself, I mostly just don't think that I think obviously in my outside of my writing life, I think about these things. I engage with them, I interact with them, I respond to them, but I just don't think that writing about these things, I don't think they are going to be productive for me personally. Now, do I think they are going to be productive for other people? And am I going to champion those people that are writing about it? Yes, absolutely. I think recently, Abdulrazak Saliu wrote about something, a particular thing that happened in Nigeria. I'm not sure what the exact event is. And there was like this micro backlash about, okay, this happened too soon. Do you think you should write about that? But people are also not acknowledging the fact that writing about something can be someone's way of dealing with that particular thing. I mean, that is basically just the whole onus of writing. So, and not writing about something might also be someone's way of interacting or dealing with that thing. So, I think it can be viewed through two lenses and it can be viewed through two ways. And I think it can be either of those things, really.
All right. Thank you. But then, um, you said, like you mentioned, you read the news, you know what is going on in Nigeria. Um, do you think the crisis going on in Nigeria affects your writing in any way? Since you are not writing on external crisis, do you think the crisis actually affects your own writing of your own internal crisis?
Actually, yes. And I think it is impossible for these things to not creep into our personal lives. Do they appear in my poems in very obvious, significant ways? No. But do they creep into my life? Do they creep into how I think about poetry, how I think about lines, how I think about metaphors mostly? Yes, because we cannot like remove ourselves from what is directly affecting us. So yes, I think all that I engage with, all that I consume in regards to like news, in regards to media and all of that, they influence the way I think about poetry, the way I write about poetry. But I think I just don't translate them directly onto the page in my own kind of writing, in the way I write. Because if the way I approach poetry is basically just like I'm not gonna say document my life because I don't think I used to be a very confessional poet, but I don't think that is the case with me again. But I think the way I approach poetry right now is just a way to write about the big things in ways that are not necessarily being they are not necessarily easy to contain. So I do not like confinement. I do not like to like just write about something very particular because I like to write about things that the human populace can relate with, just like suffering, like betrayal, godhood, stuff like that. So yes, all of the things I consume creep into my writing, but I do not necessarily like translate them directly into my works.
All right, that actually makes sense. That makes sense. So as a teacher now, what role do you think poetry can play in helping students process or confront crisis in their own lives? Now, this is very important because, okay, you are not writing about external crisis, and people are dealing with different sorts of crisis. Now, as a teacher, how do you think you can use poetry to how do you think your students that write poetry can use poetry to process or confront crisis in their own personal lives?
Thank you. So I think there's a popular saying that almost everyone that's teaching you to write is trying to teach you to write like them. And I am very much aware of this, but I also try to like step outside of that when I'm interacting with my students. Because obviously we all have biases. We all have what we think good poetry should be or what good poetry should look like, should sound like on the page. And also in regards to like subject matter, we always try to find a narcissistic mirror, try to find a lens, try to find something we can like view ourselves through. So when I interact with my student, and when most of my student or most of the students I've like been lucky to cross paths with, they almost try to document their lives. They are mostly just like poets that are very involved or very interested in the eye. And obviously, most of them are writing from a place where I was talking about internal crisis, and they all just try to respond to like their internal crisis and try to find a way to live through them. What I do is I just like I champion them, and I try to make their poems, whatever the poems decide to be, whatever they write about. I know that our obsession as poets is going to differ from person to person. So I mostly just try to help them communicate whatever they are trying to communicate properly on the page without necessarily trying to shape them into my own voice or shape them into whatever I think they should write about. So in regards to helping them manage crisis, I think most of them are mostly concerned with the internal crisis, as I was mentioning. They mostly write about the self. They mostly write about their lived experiences. They necessarily do not write in response to what is happening in the world. I am in the United States, and obviously, like when you think about crisis, it's going to be about crisis that's happening in the United States because almost all of our feelings are localized. So they mostly don't step outside of themselves to write about things that's happening in their immediate world, or like that's happening outside of their immediate world. And I just respect that, and I just let them do whatever they want to do in responding to what they feel they need to respond to in their life, in their personal life. So I think it's just basically letting people write what they want to write, and basically championing them and helping them hone their voice into the best version it can be, or the best way they can sound, the best way they can be mostly. Hi.
Can, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. So do you believe poetry has the power to alter how a society remembers or forgets its crisis? Now, this question is very important, I think, for a lot of poets because I remember when um, some magazines, I don't want to mention names, refused to publish poems that had to do with the crisis in Palestine. I remember some poets even protesting and saying that they want their poems that are already published in those magazines to be removed because they feel like the magazines are actually aiding the genocide in Gaza. So I'd love to know what you think about that.
Obviously, I think one of the horrible things that I think technology is doing to us as human is that the way we consume news, the way we access things that are supposed to be important is being altered in very big ways. I think poetry can change people's reaction to what is happening in the world? Absolutely, yes. But I also think about it in the matter of accessibility. The question should be how many people out there are reading poetry today? We cannot be delusional and say the entire world is going to read our poems. That is not true, and that is mostly because like there is no real market for poetry again. Um, in the times of say Wale Soyinka, when Wale Soyinka was writing in response to oppression that was happening in Nigeria, his poetry traveled outside of Nigeria, and it kind of like brought light to a lot of things that was happening in Nigeria. When Audre Lorde was writing in response to the oppression of women, of black people in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. obviously because like the way technology hadn't permeated our society. We were not obsessed with our cell phones. We were not obsessed with quick media, instant gratification. So people were paying more attention to what other people had to say. Martin Luther King's speech was a poem that kind of like initiated worldwide response. But we have to think about accessibility in our current day, in our current age, and think about how many people are going to even have access to our poems. Now, I think when the work is put out in the world, if people actually have access to it and are able to engage with it, do I think it's capable of doing wonderful change in our society? Yes, but I also think that we are losing that hold in regards to readership, and I think it's just a matter of like I mean things are getting worse. I know I'm dipping my hands into technology a little bit and how it's influencing the way we read and engage with news, but I think it's like there are parallels to be drawn, and I think that if we create proper avenues for the dispersion of poetry to the general populace, then yes, it can do wonderful change in the world. But we do not have that kind of market for poetry again. And I believe that when in the little moments, in the little pockets where people kind of have access to the poems, have access to what we are talking about, have access to what we are saying or what we are trying to communicate, then yes, it can do wonderful good in the world and it can change lives.
All right, all right, all right. Thank you. Um, so the next question I have is: do you feel a difference in how readers from Nigeria and from the US respond to poems that engage with crisis? And I would love you to answer this in both ways: the response when it comes to personal crisis and the response when it comes to external crisis.
Yeah, I definitely think people access poetry and read poetry differently in Nigeria and like in the Western world. And that is because in Nigeria oh no, in the Western world, everything is a way of I'm trying to phrase this in a way that wouldn't be offensive. When we write about crisis, when we write about communal crisis, and then we're writing outside when people outside of Nigeria are reading those poems, they mostly their response, I don't know, is to me it's somewhat performative sometimes because I think it's just as a result of colonialism also, and just like the way they perceive people from Africa, people from the West also, and how they like um think uh I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but I'm going to step away from
I,
what
I,
I
I
think, do I think the way we they receive writing that is not that is internal in nature, or do I think it's there from the way they receive writing that's external in nature? Yes, and that is because like when we read about things that are kind of like I mean the most popular topic in the world of writing in the world of poetry is grief, and we when someone is writing about grief, for example, and then like international readers or international audience get access to that, they can easily relate to it in a way that's not going to be performative because it's something we can all relate with. It's something we've all dealt with either directly or indirectly. But when we read about things that are kind of more external, let's say we are writing about all of the things that's happening in the north, when we're writing about all of the things that's happening in Nigeria as a whole, and then international audiences are getting access to that, they mostly react to it in a way that is I think I'm trying to be diplomatic in the way I answer this. But I just feel like the response to me, I don't think they are the audience really. And obviously we are thinking about making what is happening known to the greater world. But I
yeah.
think usually the response is usually that of it is counterproductive sometimes to me. Because like they necessarily just relate to it with it in a way that they kind of like just like the relation to it is not necessarily as grand as I expect it to be, and that is mostly because of the perception of writers from Africa, of Africans, all as a result of colonialism, basically. So when we read about internal crisis, mostly they are usually more universal, where the response to it outside of Nigeria can be more, more open and just like, okay, I can relate with it, so I can appreciate it more, compared to like when we're writing about external crisis, where their relationship with it is just going to be that of like great distance. So yeah, I just think the reaction, the relationship to it is just very different in very big ways.
Okay, I very much understand that, but I would also love to know, when you write about internal crisis, and because as a Nigerian or as an African, your main struggles, the things that you struggle with the things that they struggle with because of difference in culture, difference in geography, are mostly not the same. So do you
Mm.
think also, how do you think they react when they read poems like that?
I think they react to those poems with more openness, because like outside of the fact that there's the geographical difference, there's the cultural difference and all of that. Most of the things, when we think about internal crisis, we are mostly thinking about all of these things that almost every human that's lived in the world can relate with in one way or the other. So they mostly just like there's a sense of kinship in their relation with it, because they're like, okay, this is something I feel like I have close proximity to in a way, compared to writing about something that is more external, something that is more localized. So I think it's just a way of them trying to, I mean, obviously when we all read, we all look for the narcissistic mirror, because we want to see ourselves in the poem. If we
Yeah.
don't feel like, okay, this poem is communicating to me, I feel like I can see myself in the poem or something like that, we mostly are not going to feel great things for our poems. So it's just a thing where if most people don't recognize themselves in the poem, if they can't identify themselves, their reaction to it, their relationship with it is mostly just going to be that of distance. And and that is okay, really, because not everyone is going to be your audience. So basically, just like isolating your audience and just knowing that, okay, these are the people I'm writing for. These are the people that I'm not writing for. If they have access to my poems, that is absolutely okay. But I don't think the way they are going to react to the poem is going to be of great productivity or be of great importance to me as a poet, really.
All right, all right. Thank you. That I so much love that answer. So now I think we have like 10 more minutes, and I have so many questions, but I'll
Okay.
try and the ones that are necessary to the topic. So I'd love to really know, how do you think poetry can help us confront and make sense of the crises that define our everyday lives? Because now this question, you are the right person to ask this question, because you write about personal crisis. And I would really love to know, how does writing about personal crisis make you make sense of those crises, and make sense, and how do that define your everyday struggles?
So one of the things I tell my student is that you should approach the page as a way of interrogating rather than a way of trying to document what you already know. Obviously, most people tell you stuff like write only what you know. But if you go into a poem writing only what you've properly processed in your head, there's going to be almost zero room for surprise for you. And surprise is important in poetry.
Yeah.
I go into some poems with knowing what I want to write about. I go into some poems with just like a hint of what I'm feeling, what I feel I want to write about. So I go into the page as a way of interrogating those feelings rather than a way of documenting in absoluteness what I know about those feelings. So if you go into the poem as a way of like, okay, I want to find out more things about this thing, then you are going to surprise yourself. You are going to discover more things about what is happening internally, externally, think how to like properly understand and relate with that thing in the world. So I am thinking about like the poets that I find exciting as poets that usually kind of like approach the page as a way of understanding the external world. Approaching the page as a way of understanding the external world, as a way of understanding themselves, if that makes sense. So these poets usually don't go into poems saying, okay, I want to write about say the way my father butchered my mother. They write about these things, but they write about it in a way that they are kind of also like trying to view things from like an objective perspective, because if you are being subjective in your poem, you are going to limit yourself, limit the way you can write about things. Because almost all of our experiences are subjective. And if you're limiting yourself to that, then there's not going to be a way for you to explore deeper things in the world. So I'm thinking of say Bridget Peggin Kelly, for example. I'm thinking of what's her name? Linda Gregg. Thinking of Richard no, not Richard again. Thinking of Jack Gilbert, poets that kind of like approach the paper as a way to interrogate. So I think when I one of my red flags is that I am almost always too logical. And I think I approach the page as a way to understand my reaction to things in the world. So when I go into a poem, I go into it with a way to try to like, okay, I am trying to figure out something else outside of what I think I already know. And in writing the poem, I get to get like different ways or different lanes to like look at those things. And I think mostly I end up leaving the page with greater knowledge than I went into the page with. So I think it's just a way of trying to like approach the poem, approach the page as a way of interrogating rather than documenting at all times. Obviously, there are poems where you're going to like document in, but I think we write the best poems when we approach the page as a way of interrogating and interrogating our feelings, our reaction, our emotions, rather than just like documenting what we think we know about ourselves and the world.
Me, I mean,
Hi.
hi. Sorry, sorry.
Yeah, it's fine.
First, that's my network, and then
Yeah, it's fine.
no. So it's good. I'm sure they have recorded your
Yeah.
response. So I think I would have two more questions, and then we end the conversation. So, looking ahead, what do you think the role of African poets, especially Nigerian poets, will be in shaping conversations about crisis globally? Now, this is very important because I have seen situations, I have read tweets where people would say, "Oh, why would you be writing about Palestine? Or why are you writing about Sudan when you are in Nigeria and there is enough crisis for you to write about as a Nigerian? Why are you writing about other people's crisis?"
Um, Again, first of all, I think, as I mentioned, it's a thing about proximity. Um, do I think some poets in Nigeria should write about what is happening in Gaza, what is the genocide, and all of the things that's happening? Absolutely. And I think it's just a way of managing their own response, managing their own reaction to those things. Um, I mean, again, talking about proximity, the immediate response for anyone would be like, okay, if you want to write about something, you should write about something that is more immediate to you. And say, for example, a Nigerian poet that's writing about all of the big things that are happening in Nigeria and just stepping outside of Nigeria to write about those, about other things. Um, do I think our first devotion should be to our immediate society? Absolutely. Because I think it would then become performative if a poet is writing about things that are happening externally, that's happening outside of their immediate society, and ignoring what is happening in their immediate society. But also, I think it's kind of like a two-sided sword, where them not writing about what is happening in their immediate society might be because they are just they're not interested in writing about it as a way to be rebellious about what is happening. Because when we talk about something, we fan the fire of that thing, we
Yeah,
give it more life. And if something is up, I'm sure you know, like if something is happening to you, like if something is happening to you, your reaction to it will be different from when that same thing, from if that thing is happening to someone like someone distant, like a friend, say like an acquaintance or something. So I absolutely understand if some people don't want to read about the crisis that's happening to them personally, because it can be overwhelming to document your lived experiences. I mean, the way we are going to react to things are going to be very different. Some poets find it easy to write about themselves. Some poets find it easier to write about something that is outside of themselves. So I think it's just basically giving people grace and understanding that someone not writing about something might be, as you mentioned, a response to that thing, and might be just their way of saying, okay, I am not going to give this thing more life, and I'm just going to use this as my own way of rebelling against whatever is happening. And they'd rather, their interest would rather be something that is external. But I think there are nuances, and I think there are ways to look at this where I mean, it's just a thing where you can, there are no set formula for you to know that okay, this person is not writing about it because they don't want to, they don't want to document their reaction to it because of how much it affects them. But I think it's just a thing of acknowledging authorial intention, letting people do what they want to do if the ethical responsibility is there. We don't have the ethical responsibility to write about certain things. I think obviously you're going to think about empathy, like okay, I'm writing about this because I feel empathetic for I feel empathy for the people that are experiencing the thing, and that's why I feel the need to write that. But we do not have the right to write about everything in the world. So it's basically acknowledging to yourself that there are certain things you have the right to write about and certain things you don't have the right to write about. The ethical responsibility is not always going to be there for everybody to write about everything. So, and also acknowledging that some people might not write about certain things as a way to rebel against that thing, as a way of responding to that thing. So it's kind of like a two-sided sword, and it's a slippery slope, basically.
Okay, that was an amazing answer, and I pray that the critics will listen. So, so this is going to be my last question. If you could imagine a future beyond crisis, whether internal or external crisis, what kind of poetry would you like to write then?
um, I where a future without crisis, is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah.
I think it is impossible for me to imagine a future without crisis because, um, as humans, as ironic as it might sound, crisis got us to where we are today. As the point of humanity today is fed by crisis. Without crisis, we wouldn't be where we are today. So I think removing crisis from our everyday lives, again, as ironic as it might sound, is would be just like removing something that is integral to our growth. Um, I feel like pressure, diamond, all of these things. We need things to push us outside of ourselves to be able to live in the world as thinkers, as critics, as writers, as anything really. So I think obviously the realm of imagination is there for you to think about anything, to think about what is generally impossible. But I think I just can't possibly think of a world where crisis wouldn't be a thing. And again, we are talking about crisis in regards to scale, the big things, the small things, the things that's happening inside of us, the things that's happening outside of us. And I just can't imagine that. And also because like every single poem is born of crisis. Every single poem is political in nature. If you're writing about love, that is political in nature. If you're writing about, say, my cat ran away, that is political in nature. If you think about it properly. So I think every poem is a crisis poem in one way or the other. And I think we would lose a lot to language, to history, if we lived in a world that we didn't have crisis. Because I mean, I'm very sure you're not thinking about crisis in just like, oh, the wars that's happening, the things that are just like in Gaza scale. Say what is happening in Gaza, what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening in Sudan, and all of that. Crisis can be big and it can be small, and if we remove that from our everyday lives, then I don't think humanity would be what we currently experience it as right now. So no, it is impossible for me to imagine a world without crisis because that would strip us of a lot of things that makes us human. Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, we both know what is going on. Um,
Yeah,
so I think we've come to the end of the conversation. Thank you very much, Amin. Thank you so very much, and
yeah,
I enjoyed this conversation. I wish I could ask the other questions I have, but another time, inshallah.
yeah, inshallah.
So I don't know. Um, you have to stay for a few minutes. They are going to, like, you have to be here for them to finish. I don't know how it works, but for a few minutes for them to finish the whole recording thing, and then you can just leave.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
very much.
yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Would you want to talk about other things within our time?